This is Mrs. Rabbicano from Fairfax Multi Academy Trust, and I'm here today to go through a walking talking mock for AQA English Language Paper 1, and this video will focus on question 1. For the purpose of this walking talking mock, before you start, make sure you've read the insert for AQA English Language Paper 1 from June 2018. This you should have got from your English teacher, or you can also find this on the AQA website under the English Language tab for GCSE. The extract is a short story from a short story by Joanne Harris. The short story is called Jigs and Reels, although you will probably have heard of this paper being called the Mr. Fisher paper. So I'm going to just summarise the steps for answering question 1 because it is a very simple 4-mark question, but sometimes students do lose marks and make some very silly mistakes which can be avoided if you follow these simple steps. So first and foremost, you need to read the question and underline the focus. Then you box off the lines that you are going to be focusing on. You pick out the 4 statements that relate to the focus of the question, and then you write your 4 statements out in short but full sentences. So to make sure that makes sense, I'm now going to model that for you with the Mr. Fisher paper and use the visualizer to show you how I go about answering the question. Okay, so let's look at applying those steps in practice. The first step is to read the question and then underline the focus. So it says read again the first part of the source from lines 1 to 4. List 4 things about Mr. Fisher from this part of the source. So there's our focus. We are going to be looking at 4 things that we learn about Mr. Fisher. I'm going to underline Mr. Fisher just to make sure that I'm focused, that I don't start talking about the weather or the environment. I'm just focusing on what I learn about Mr. Fisher. And then, just to make sure I don't stray, I box off. So this is step 2. I box off the lines because I've seen some students sometimes who may say, oh, we'd had a disappointing term at St Oswald's. You'll get no marks for that from the examiner because you strayed outside the lines. So what I do is box off the area that I'm going to focus on just to make sure I don't make any mistakes. Then all I do is very simply underline or just pick out the things that I learn about Mr. Fisher. Well, he lived alone in a small terraced house in the centre of town. He did not own a car, and he preferred to do as much of his weekend marking in the form room after school, but sometimes he would take some marking home on the bus. Okay, so he had papers to take home on the bus. So there's lots and lots that I could answer there about Mr. Fisher, and that's taken me a very short amount of time to pick those out. But what I have to do now is get those into my response. So what do I do? Well, let's keep it really simple and live from the text. So my first one is going to be Mr. Fisher lived alone. And I've just picked that from the text. Please notice that I've started my answer with the same phrase that has been used with the subject. So Mr. Fisher is our subject, and I've started with that phrase. So Mr. Fisher lived alone. Then I'm going to say Mr. Fisher lived in a small terraced house. Note again, I've started with the subject of Mr. Fisher, and I've just lifted from here. He lived alone. He lived in a small terraced house. I'm going to do the next one. He did not own a car. Again, I'm starting with Mr. Fisher. Did not own a car. Okay, so there's my third one. He did not own a car. And then finally, the next statement was quite a convoluted one, and I saw a lot of students sort of get that wrong. So I'm going to stick with the last one, and I'm going to say Mr. Fisher usually took books home on the bus to mark. Okay, and bang. There are my 4 answers. Notice that I've started with the subject, But all I'm doing is literally, as you can see, lifting the words from the text and using that to write my 4 statements. But again, notice I have written in full sentences. That saves any confusion from the examiner. So hopefully you can see there how easy it is to answer paper 1 question 1 and how easy it should be to get 4 marks. So let's now summarise what we have to do for paper 1 question 1, and this is our simple 4-mark question, so we shouldn't spend too long, only about 4 minutes on this question. But to summarise, we read the question, underline the focus, we box off the lines, we pick out 4 statements that we're going to use, and we're going to lift the words from the text to write 4 answers in short but full sentences to make sure that they make sense. And that concludes the walking talking mark for paper 1 question 1.